Bienvenidos de nuevo a Oportunidades en Grecia, el podcast en el que tratamos de acercar las oportunidades que, en el marco de la internacionalización, de la exportación, la inversión y la captación de financiación, el país presenta para la empresa española. Welcome again to Oportunidades en Grecia, the podcast where we try to get business opportunities regarding exports and investments in the country, Greece, closer to Spanish companies. Today, in this our 13th episode, we're back with the Greek economy and some of the well-known sectors of interest for the Spanish companies. Tourism, electricity, renewables, logistics, digital, real estate industry. And we happen to have with us a fantastic speaker, Nikos Vettas. Nikos, good morning. Thanks for coming.
Good morning. Thank you.
Nikos is the General Director of the Foundation for Economic and Industrial Research, IOBE, one of the most important think tank in the country since 2013. And he is a professor of economics at the Athens University of Economics and Business since 2003, where he has also served as chairman of the economics department and member of the University Council. Nikos' research has been published in leading journals such as the International Economic Review, European Economic Review, and so on and so forth. And he has been vice chairman of the Growth Plan Committee of the Hellenic Republic for the Greek economy, published in 2022, where he shared leadership with Mr. Pisaridis. Before shooting the questions, I would like to briefly update about the situation, which we find very positive of the Greek economy. Very good macroeconomic indicators. Of course, there's always room for improvement, but very good macroeconomic indicators. Excellent RRF execution, Recovery and Resilience Plan execution, with the fourth and the fifth tranche to be most probably endorsed before and after the summer. Beforehand, good capacity to adapt to the new fiscal rules. Bonds or sovereign bonds being issued at interest rate which is somewhere in between Italian and Spanish bonds, and the investment grade that has been guaranteed by some of the most well-known rating agencies lately. We'll discuss about all this in this podcast with Nico. Nico, I would like to ask you, first of all, first question, a little update on the macroeconomic situation. Here, if you could give us some light about the evolution of growth, GDP growth. We had a 2% growth in 2023, 2.3 forecast 2024. A little bit on inflation, employment, and on the current account. What is the current situation of these macro aggregates? What do you think are the perspectives in the near medium term?
Greece has recently been on a very strong recovery trajectory. Greece has been recovering from multiple crises, has been on a debt crisis already starting from 2010, 3 successive rescue programs with the IMF involved, triggered, of course, initially by the global financial crisis in 2008. Then when things would recover, we had the COVID pandemic crisis. Then, of course, it was the energy crisis. Now, within all that, the Greek economy has been pushed down very, very strongly, and now it is recovering strongly as well. The numbers that we have seen for real GDP growth the last years are actually much higher than the European average. The more recent numbers that we have for 2023 is that the Greek economy grew by about 2% in real terms, which is about 4% more than 4 times the Eurozone average. A projection for next year, our projection at IOBE, is that this growth rate will remain high, maybe slightly higher, perhaps towards 2.4% is our current estimate. And we anticipate that unless there is global turbulence in the global financial markets or something in the European environment, Greece will be growing in the next at least 2 or 3 years significantly higher than the rest of Europe. On the fiscal side, things are stable. Greece did not get into 3 rescue programs just because of fiscal imbalances. It was also a competitiveness issue. However, it is always the fiscal side, the inability to finance yourself, that triggers near bankruptcies. And Greece now is on solid fiscal ground. To be honest, the high inflation also helped, because the majority of Greek tax revenue is from indirect taxes. Also, the income tax scale is quite progressive, and that helps the government gain extra revenue than what it was expecting. Also, whenever you have debt, either public debt or private debts, inflation is your friend. So Greece now is not in any sense in a dangerous fiscal situation, and this is reflected also to the fact that the majority of the main rating agencies have actually given Greece a rating that corresponds to investment grade after 13 years of crisis. So Greece is recovering very strongly.
Very briefly, could you elaborate a little bit more on the employment market? I think you talked about competitivity or productivity. Could you talk a little bit about labor scarcity, minimum wage? Throw a couple of words on that issue.
There are good and bad news about the labor market in Greece. The main good news is that gradually over the last few years, the unemployment rate is being reduced. The unemployment rate at the heart of the crisis, at the middle of the crisis, around 2014 or something, was an amazing 30%. Now, year by year, it is going down to 10%. 10% may sound high for some countries, but actually it is not that far from the Spanish unemployment rates, and not that far from what Greece had the years before the crisis. And it's actually now at a point where, at least at certain segments of the labor market, there is scarcity. You cannot find people. Companies are trying to hire from other companies, and also they're trying to attract people from abroad. And this is Greeks that left during the crisis, the infamous brain drain that was huge for Greece, and now some of these people are returning. But also non-Greeks that may find that this is a good country to work in. So we have a labor market that is actually doing quite well if you are on the side of the workers. The other part, one thing to say though, there are 2 more important things to say. One is that this improvement in the labor market is not uniform. Where you have increasingly higher demand is the upper end, so people that are highly skilled, engineers, scientists, very experienced business people, etc., in the medical professions, etc. The other extreme of the labor market, which is non-skilled work, for construction, for some works in the tourism business, etc., you also have very significant mismatches and lack of people. But if you go to the middle of the market, so people that are doing routine office work without any particular specialization, etc., So these people are still feeling the pressure of high inflation without their wages increasing that much. And this actually does generate a little bit of a social pressure on the government. And from an economist viewpoint, it also generates the need that these people will have to be retrained and retooled so that they get more strongly into the labor market, especially when you have technology trends like artificial intelligence replacing jobs down the road. The other thing is the demographic. Greece is one of the European countries that has a fairly adverse demographic profile. We do live longer, but we don't have that many children, and the number of people left the country, as I mentioned, during the crisis. That's a bad thing. The good thing is that there are still a lot of reservoirs from where you can get strength. For instance, labor force participation in Greece is relatively low, especially in areas for women, for young people, also for people that retire at relatively young age. So all these are now changing, and we are bringing these parts of the population into the labor market more systematically, which is very important.
Which by the end of the day is just more growth. I would like to ask you about the investment, sort of like the investment gap and the investment grade that was guaranteed by most of the rating agencies, as you mentioned before, lately. Starting before summer 2023 and ending the process, I think, late in 2023. What do you think is the impact? What do you think will be the impact if it was not discounted before on FDI, on foreign direct investment? Do you think that will have an impact in the dynamics of the privatization process?
Well, overall investment in Greece really almost was driven to the ground during the crisis years. From about 24% of GDP, it went down to 11% of GDP when the GDP itself shrunk by 25%. So we're talking about an almost no new investment coming into the country, other than what was necessary for businesses to survive, just survive, but not grow. This has been reversed during the last years. Last year was the first year when adding to the capital stock actually was more than cumulative depreciation. And we saw investment in various areas. Some of that was foreign direct investment. Some of that was also some of that was local capital. Some of that was capital. Some of that was foreign companies that do business with Greek companies and they grow jointly. Not being in investment grade was obviously a problem. And this is something that has been solved now to a very much extent. There is still one rating agency that is more cautious. However, the areas, there are two, I would say, obvious areas that would facilitate incoming investment and were functioning the last few years already. And then there is a new area, and I mean across fields. So one overall vehicle for incoming investment was privatizations. So the privatizations in various fields, infrastructure, tourism, land, was something that was functioning and still is going to function. Over the next few years, although at the diminishing rate, like relative to before. So you're not going to have the boost that you had during the crisis years when there was a pressure also from the creditors to privatize. The other area that we haven't seen its full effect yet is that many Greek businesses, and many of these businesses are actually not that bad, have debt that they cannot service. So these are the famous non-performing loans, and these non-performing loans they are also an opportunity to restructure, perhaps to separate ownership from management, to bring in new business practices and new capital. So we have seen some of that, but not that much of that. And I anticipate that bringing in companies from abroad and bringing in also just financial investment from abroad is going to facilitate this process. But what me as an economist would think that the Greek economy would benefit more from is if you have investment that is adding new capacity in new fields and new overall economic areas. And we are seeing some of that. However, it is true that with the cost of money being very high, well, not necessarily in absolute terms, but much higher in Greece than in other countries, with uncertainty about the future being extreme, you couldn't have much investment. I believe that now Greece is on a lot more solid ground, such that it's easy to think about investment growth now in certain key areas.
I would like to take it from there and ask you to give us some light about certain sectors where there is activity from the part of the Spanish companies. Some of them export, and some of them invest in this sector. So, let's take a few of them. I would like to ask you first of all about tourism. The Spanish companies invested in the country. Some of them are supplying equipment. There is a great forecast for 2024. I recently read that Aegean, the national is privatized, but company that flies from and to Greece has increased 27% the income. I think I read a couple of days ago. An important increase in international seat availability, plus 10% for 2024. Do you foresee any bottlenecks to this clear positive data?
You mean for the tourism market?
Yeah, for the tourism sector.
Right. Tourism is one of the two, let's call them industries or sectors, where Greece is at the top level globally, and the second one being shipping, maritime shipping. Of course, it has very strong activity in other areas, but tourism and shipping, in those two, Greece operates at the top level. We also saw after the COVID shock in the global tourism industry that Greece recovered very well. Greece combines a number of attractive features when it comes to tourism. It is in Europe, obviously, but it's still not at the heart of Europe. So people that want to change scenery in some sense, and they come to Greece, they can have an excellent time, and they're willing to pay for it. Also, it combines with history and culture. It combines with new trends like healthy lifestyles and food, etc. Having said that, the infrastructure in certain areas has been lacking. Greek airports for a long time were actually not in top shape. And over the last 5 years or so, there has been significant investment also in the peripheral airports in many of the islands, etc. There is now an improvement program when it comes to ports, because Greece, because of the many islands, just to give you a sense of magnitude, Greece is a country of about between 10 and 11 million Greeks, but it attracts about 35 million tourists every summer. So you need to have all sort of upgrading of infrastructure in order to be able to service these people at the top level. And this is a continuing process. Hotels have been upgrading and renovating. There are new roads that are connecting the main ports and cities. But I do believe that as much as important tourism today is for the Greek economy, I believe that over the next decade or two, it may probably double or triple. Not necessarily in attracting more people. I do not believe the goal should be that you go from 35, to 50 or to 70 million people coming. But by making the tourism season longer, not just July and August. In fact, this is already happening. By making cities destination. Athens didn't used to be what many Spanish cities already were, or Thessaloniki in the north, or other cities like Chania or Iraklio in Crete, Patra or Ioannina in the west. So these are now cities that many people, especially Europeans, they realize that they are very pleasant to visit for 2 or 3 days or 4, and they're not all that expensive. So there are trends. We are still far below the desirable level in certain areas like conferences, seminars, things like that. Medical tourism are still not very developed. But putting everything together, I anticipate that's a market that is going to grow. After all, as Europeans, we are also getting gradually older in terms of the average population, and we have to do pleasant things.
So you throw out there a couple of very interesting tips for the companies: city break, extension of the season, wellness tourism, congress tourism, things that could grow bigger in the medium long run.
Let me add one little thing here. Many people from abroad, if they have not visited Greece, they think that it's only the islands that you can visit. Greece has a very attractive mainland. It has high mountains, the Peloponnese, northern Greece, everywhere. So this is... In terms of investing there, we are only now scratching the surface.
I could not agree more. We always recommend people to go to the Peloponnese, for instance, which is the great unknown, I think, for foreigners, foreign tourism in the country, as well as the northern parts of the country. Moving on, I would like to ask you also about electricity/renewables, where again, some Spanish companies have invested or supplying equipment. What do you think about the future of the sector? We know that there is an interest in creating an energy renewables hub in the country that could provide eventually to the northern part of Europe. Do you foresee any bottlenecks to the growth that is expected? Because big growth is expected in the market.
Well, the entire Europe, if not the entire world, is in a transition when it comes to energy. Greece has been running faster than the European average when it comes to the transition from fossil fuels to renewables, both solar and wind, and just a tiny bit of geothermal. There are very significant investments that are happening there. Many of them supported by the recovery fund. However, as you mentioned, there are still bottlenecks ahead that once they get removed, then you anticipate growth is going to be even faster. And I would say the main I don't want to call it a bottleneck, but the main question mark is what is going to happen to the energy markets globally. When you have crises like in Ukraine, now in the Middle East, this creates a lot of turbulence. So it is unclear how you should plan. And the second matter has to do with the balancing of the system, the main grid, how fast you can grow a system of batteries and storage, because with renewables you need to have storage. So all of these are very open and important issues that whoever invests in these markets, and if you are a big player, you don't just invest passively, you also shape the market. If you are an early mover, you can have very significant rewards. But for Greece, this green transition, just to pair this with the previous discussion of tourism, it's important for the overall image of the country. That it is a country that respects its environment, leaving apart all the other reasons why we should be respecting the environment, social, saving the planet and all that, because it is also economically what Greece should rely on.
There is plenty to do. As you said, if you're an early bird, sort of, when investing, you could eventually somehow shape or help to shape the market in this case. I would like to ask you also about logistics. We all know, and we express it as many times as we're asked about it, that the country is also about turning into a logistics hub, its geographical position, and so on and so forth, which has actually to do also with tourism, probably electricity, renewables, and so on. There are some companies, Spanish companies, that were invested at the time, roads, airports, and so on and so forth. They might have an interest in the near future. We actually brought 9 companies last week from the railway sector, which expressed a huge interest for the situation. How do you see the sector in the medium run?
Well, as you said, this is a sector where significant progress is being made. This has to do with private investment, but it also has to do with infrastructure projects. It is coupled with what happened at the port of Piraeus and the privatization there. The investments that are needed for the train line to proceed north, and other facility investments, especially around Athens. What is happening in the north is still a little bit one step behind, but there is potential there as well. I think the micro picture in the sector is useful, but the macro picture is the more important one, which is that Greece is an entry point for Europe. And if you believe that global geopolitical tensions, possibly between China and the United States, are going to change global trade, are going to shorten supply chains, then Greece has the geographic location that makes the raw material, the starting point is there. And I will not be surprised if over the next decade we see exponential growth in the sector.
Excellent. Well, that's what we were told in our workshop last week, right? The importance of building connections towards the borders through railways, so that the country could eventually become that logistics hub that we all expect to happen, to be. Some more info about maybe digital sector. What is the situation? Where do you see the country? We all know some big companies have invested lately, last 2 years. How do you foresee this sector?
Well, let me start this by saying that I still don't think that Greece is where it should and where it could be. But let me also indicate areas of huge progress and promise. So one is that over the last few years, maybe 3 years or so, there has been very significant progress in digital transformation in the broader public sector, but also how this is connected with businesses and abroad, and so this process has started. And Greece is a lot more digital, if this is a proper term, than what it used to be 3 or 4 years ago. That's one. The second thing comes from the supply side in this industry. Greece has a very good and high level number of Greek engineers, IT people who are highly skilled. Whether they studied abroad or here, well connected globally. So Greece also currently operates as a hub. We don't necessarily see this in the data, but there are a lot of companies, smaller or middle size, that are exporting a lot of software. They're exporting a lot of digital solutions globally. In the construction sector, certainly in shipping, in manufacturing, so you do see that. You see a lot of exports of digital services from Greece. The third thing that we do see is the digital transformation of some of the larger companies, from refineries, big manufacturers, etc. What we have not, however, seen is putting all of these things together. The public sector, the small companies or startups and scientists, the large companies. You have all of these ingredients, but I anticipate that once you put these things together, the Greek economy will be able to get on a higher trajectory. After all, if you look not through the years but through the centuries, Greece has always prospered when it operated as a very open system. In the Eastern Mediterranean, at the edge of Europe, and it can operate as a hub for its greater area, the Balkans, Turkey, Cyprus, of course, Israel and Middle East, Northern Africa. And digital is a way to connect easier.
Well, I can't agree more. We've been trying to help Spanish companies cooperate with Greek companies from the venture capital ecosystem and the startup ecosystem. We believe, for very many reasons, that Greece is a very good place to hold your operations within the Balkans and the Middle East. And that takes me to another thing that I want to ask you about: potential of the industry in the country. I think that's maybe the name of the game now, trying to get the industry to its potential in almost every country. We're all trying to do that. And I would like to ask you specifically for the agri-food sector and the food tech, because we believe that the capacities in the country are strong. And as we just mentioned, the country could always be a base to provide in the region, broader region, Balkans and Middle East. Do you think there is potential in the agri-food sector, food tech, generally speaking?
Huge, but it still not realized. So Greece is still a net importer when it comes to food, although this is more unprocessed food, especially meat that comes from other European countries. It does have a good brand. It does have not just a good, I would say, an excellent brand name. Especially when you want to connect with the Mediterranean diet and all of that, and whether you think about many of these products. Of course, they're common with Spain, like olive oil or wine, etc. However, there are several reasons why the Greek food industry, let's call it, or the overall sector is lacking behind its full potential. And one is that thus far, the average size of businesses has been very small, which is often good for quality if you find the product, but it's very hard to find the product in a consistent manner. This is changing, and there is a big opportunity for some consolidation in this sector. I would say that, especially that would connect primary production and the agricultural production and manufacturing. So one thing was small size. The other thing was that, especially during the last 15 years, there was so much uncertainty about the overall path of the Greek economy that no one wanted to have supply from Greece, because they might think that, well, who knows what's going to happen in 3 months or 6 months. And now with this uncertainty not there, actually exports of Greek food products have been increasing significantly the last couple of years or 3. And especially during the COVID pandemic, it was, along with medicine, the two main products that Greece saw a significant boost in that. So I anticipate that connecting everything, as we discussed, also, the history of the country, the brand name, etc., the fact that there are scientists and engineers at a high level and not as expensive as they would be perhaps in Germany or the Netherlands, there is huge potential in the field.
Well, we have talked about tourism, electricity/renewables, logistics, digital, industry, agri-food. I would like to ask you very briefly to see what's your take on real estate, because it is connected somehow with tourism. What should we expect about the prices in the sector? Will those prices still go up a little bit? Would that moderate in the near future? What's your take?
Well, it's extremely dangerous to make predictions about prices of anything, but especially about real estate prices. The only thing to say here, which is important, is that after a huge decrease that started in 2010, Greek prices were much lower than in the rest of Europe. And the current growth that we have seen is actually still below what we have seen in many other European countries, where now you start seeing some fatigue, especially in Northern Europe. So, although it's hard to predict, I do not anticipate that we're going to see the real estate market regressing to lower levels soon. The other thing to say, however, is that there are many open issues and challenges. One you already mentioned. Real estate in Greece doesn't just mean housing or offices. To a very large extent, it means tourism. And tourism is not just hotels. Tourism is also houses that foreigners would buy and spend some months there, especially once they retire, but also rent to others. And to connect this with the tourism discussion we had earlier, Greece, I'm not exactly sure whether this was by coincidence or this was by design, still has very underdeveloped areas that have not been destroyed by huge masses of cement or ugly large hotels. So for people to invest in Greece so that they don't just come and spend 2 weeks, but they may come and spend 2 months or 6 months, for me, this is perhaps the brightest spot when it comes to growth in real estate outside of the cities. Now, within the cities, what you do have is that you haven't had much investment in the last basically 15 years, since 2008, since Lehman Brothers, effectively. So now there is a big need to renovate and to reorganize the urban space. Also with the demographic changing, with how we work changing, whether we work at the office, what sort of office spaces we want. So what we do see gradually is more and more investment that is transforming the existing stock of houses and old buildings into new buildings. And for that, all these are investments that require significant upfront money, but they also require skills and imagination.
So could we then say that supply is slowly adapting to demand, which will explain the scenario that you're mentioning?
Slowly, because thus far financing was not easy. And, as we discussed, the country was not on stable enough ground up until more recently. So yes, supply is gradually adapting to demand. And the prospects seem more positive than negative, even after we have seen a significant price increase already for the last 4 or 5 years.
Great. Very, very interesting information, a lot of light about the sectors. Let me get back to the fiscal policy very briefly. You mentioned the financial programs starting 2010, enhanced supervision, so on and so forth. I would like to ask you, what's your position regarding the new fiscal rules? We usually normally listen people saying that adapting will be much easier for Greece since it has been adapting to something like this already for years. Would that be your approach to the new fiscal rules?
Well, the new fiscal rules is important for how Europe is going to grow. Europe doesn't only have open wounds from the recent crisis, and it has challenges like what we have with Ukraine, etc. But Europe overall, during the last decades, has shown lower productivity growth and lower competitiveness relative to the US and to Asia. So we have to think about how much we invest in physical and human capital. And that is related to the fiscal rules and with how we are going to play with fiscal and monetary policy overall in Europe. For Greece, there are several things to say. So one is that Greece indeed went through a very severe austerity program, restructuring of its debt. The debt is still high. It has the largest GDP, the largest public debt to GDP in Europe. So that is worrisome, and that's something that the Greek policymakers have never to forget. But having said that, it is coming down as a ratio of GDP fast, and quite importantly, this debt is quite long run. It is not imminent. So to the extent that Greece gets on a high growth trajectory, it is anticipated that handling that debt is not going to be a problem. Again, however, there are still things that one needs to be careful about. For instance, the new discussion about military expenditure in Europe and defense. It is possible that, especially after the upcoming US elections, Europeans will be asked to put their hand deeper in the pocket for our collective defense. And Greece has been experiencing this actually for decades because of where it is. And I'm not sure to what extent this is very well known, but Greece has been spending a very significant part of its GDP for its defense. And I'm mentioning this because how defense is going to get into the overall fiscal rules in Europe, that is going to be important, along, of course, with how we grow. We mentioned before aspects of digital and green and all that. However, having been through hard times and learning how to navigate through programs from abroad, I do not anticipate that for Greece adjusting to the fiscal rules is going to be an issue.
Yeah, that sounds just right. Let me ask you a last question on here. I would like you to elaborate a little bit about the funding side of the economy. And I briefly mentioned at the very beginning the RRF. It looks like it's had a great execution, which is funding also for investments. But I would also like to know your view on the whole financial sector, from the systemic banks to the role played by other institutions such as the European Investment Bank, the EBRD, the Hellenic Development Bank, and so on and so forth. What's your position, what's your take on the general map of funding in the country?
Well, in one word or three, I would say that it is in a transition. The overall financing of Greece and the system were quite weak in the last decade, and they're recovering quite strongly. The Greek banks, following the last recapitalization, they are now able to give the necessary funds to the internal economy. They have also transformed themselves, starting from governance also to becoming very much high tech. They have got rid of a lot of the unneeded personnel. They have automized pretty much everything. It is still an issue for me, however, that the overall functioning of capital markets in Greece is weaker than what is desired, in the sense that funding comes primarily from the banks. The stock market has a very significant, has a lot of room to grow further. Also venture capital, etc. And in that regard, there are many initiatives when it comes to European policy, and you mentioned already several entities that are working with the Greek businesses and with the Greek authorities to facilitate the flow. There was like a metaphor that was made during the deep crisis years, starting, as I said, 2010, etc., that you were trying to fix the engine of the Greek economy, but fixing the engine, there wasn't much of a point in fixing the engine when you didn't have any fuel. Now that the engine is to a certain extent fixed, not 100%, Greece still has a very important path of reform ahead of it. However, it is not the same engine that it was during the crisis. So now you have the engine and you have at least enough fuel for now. If you couple also the private money with the RRF, the recovery fund, the room for Greece, the way for Greece ahead is, getting always to upgrading the engine of the economy and attracting more fuel.
Well, a lot of information and very interesting indeed. We talked about many things: macroeconomic indicators, 2.4 expected this year, beyond the average expectation. way over the EU average, better than the EU average for the next few years as well for the Greek GDP. We talk about labor scarcity, sort of like a dual market where there is a skilled and less skilled people, and what's the prognosis about those. We talk about investments. Nikos, you talked a lot about the sectors that have an interest for Spanish companies, and I think it was very, very, very interesting. We talk about tourism, electricity, logistics, digital, real estate, industry, agri-food. Also about fiscal policy, apparently an easier path than for others to abide by the new rules. RRF and funding, the new map. You mentioned the before years ago. It was about trying to fix an engine with little fuel. Now there's an engine, there is fuel. Things look much better. I would like to thank you, Nikos, for your participation in the podcast. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. It was a great opportunity, and I hope if we can do this again in 1 or 2 years, we're going to have a much brighter picture for Greece, as it is already on a very upward-looking path.
Well, we will be there. I hope to see you again within 1 year, and the upward scenario keeps on the hike. Y nosotros nos vemos de nuevo pronto en Oportunidades en Grecia. Aún nos queda mucho por conocer. Modelos alternativos de inversión en el país, el papel de los servicers en el sistema financiero griego, el comercio electrónico, en particular los marketplaces. Hasta pronto.